arborist and has a lot of great information for us. And we're excited to have Liz with us to tell us her experience in the city of Rehoboth with local tree ordinances. So at this time, Liz, I'm going to stop sharing and give you the ability to share your screen.
All right, well, at least I've unmuted myself, so I'm going to hit share now.
I'm going to go ahead and give you the rights because I think that you need to have presenter rights. Just one second. There you go.
Okay. Did it show up now?
Not yet.
No.
Try one more time. There you go. It's starting to share now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let me put myself in presenter view. All right. So now we are ready to go. So I'll tell you guys a bit about myself before I get going. So I actually grew up in the city of Rehoboth, and I worked for a local company here before I ended up working for the Parks Department in New York City. And I worked there for only a few years, and it was right in the midst of the Million Trees campaign. And I left like, I'd say a couple of months after Sandy hit. So I left and they were still cleaning up from a major storm. From there, I went to a big private tree company located outside of DC. And then when this position came up in the city of Rehoboth, I ended up coming back here. So kind of a little bit of a full circle, so to speak. And I've been with the city of Rehoboth for, let's see, I'll round up a little, 5.5 years now. So just a little bit about Rehoboth. If you guys are from Delaware, you probably know it a little, but it is a very small town in size. We have very few people who live here year round. In the summer, we have about 25,000 residents. We can have up to 50,000 people in our 1 square mile town on any given day from June through September. It gets packed in those times and everybody dies to get to the beach. So our budget is around 20 million, including our capital projects, which seems like a lot for 1,500, but is really not a lot for 25,000. So we kind of land right in between there. And my budget for the department I work in, which takes care of all the landscaping and the maintenance and the forestry for all street trees and all the parks, and just kind of excludes the recreation part of parks, is about, what does that amount to? 1.5% of our total budget. And then just to give you a little idea of context, the city is expensive to live in. If you want to buy a single family home, it's going to cost you 1.5 million, up to 4 million if you want to be on the beach. The condos run a lot less, but we have a good tax base for those few thousand residences. So a little bit of background on Archery Ordinance. Way back when, in 1988, we did the first section. It's now called Article 1. And some of you may be familiar with that part of the tree ordinance. It's straight out of Arbor Day. They want you to have that for your Tree City requirement. And it's good. It's a good baseline to really establish who is responsible for what with private and public trees. Then I guess almost 20 years later, we put in a second article, and this is where it got fun. We did regulation for private property. So we established a set of rules to dictate what could be removed, when it could be removed, and then how many trees you actually have to keep on your lot. So Article 1 is a really good spot to start if you work for a municipality, or HOAs sometimes have them too. If you just want to kind of designate who's responsible for what. Like for example, in this picture, that is a city street tree. So we would be responsible for fixing that lifted sidewalk. And that takes away a big objection a lot of residents have to street trees, is they don't want to, like in our code, they're actually responsible for the sidewalks unless it's a street tree damage. and everybody likes getting that taken care of for them. It also gives the city power to require dead tree removal on private property, removal of limbs infringing on the sidewalk and parking area. And I also think of it almost as a way to test the waters. If you have public support for something like this and your city can lead the way, the public loves to see the city at the forefront of things and doing things right instead of just slapping a bunch of regulation and code down on them and not following it themselves. So Article 2, like I said, it was 2006. It came about, and I obviously wasn't working for the city then, but from my memory and understanding of it, it had been a general discontent in the city that we had a lot of this happening, these pictures. Wooded lots, big mature trees removed, little beach houses removed, and then 3,000 square foot, 2-3-story homes taking up the whole lot put in. And yes, they maybe would plant, like in this case, we have like one sapling there off to the side, but that dramatic change in the streetscape really prompted the citizens and the city officials to take notice. And so what really got the second article of our tree code going was the public opinion. So it got the ball rolling on that. So we had the support before they instituted that article. And I don't show you this so that you read every word, but a few things always pop out to me in the code. And that is protect, preserve, manage, maintain. And that's what really both articles set out to do. So I put this little quote on here because a couple years ago I was doing a tree permit inspection and the house was a beach rental. And I talked to the renter who was very friendly. And she said this somewhat incredulously. She couldn't believe that they had to get a permit to remove a tree on their own property. And so I joked back and I was like, yes, you need a permit for everything in Rehoboth, which isn't far from the truth, honestly. And her response was to me, well, whatever you're doing, it's working. It's beautiful here, and we just love coming. And so whenever people get mad at me and are arguing with me on the phone about the tree code, I try to bring that back in my mind that the rules and regulations you have are what set the stage for your community, what it looks like, how it's used, and how people respect it. So how to get a permit, what would qualify? So you don't just get granted a tree permit because you asked for one. The tree has to meet certain parameters. It has to be dead or dying or severely diseased or hazardous. And when I say hazardous, I don't mean the homeowner thinks it's a hazard. I mean, it's actually a hazard that an ISA certified arborist or an arborist with a track qualification would say. And then another big part of it is if the tree is in the way of new construction. So what doesn't qualify for tree removal? The reasons you can't get a permit is if you just don't like the way the tree looks, you're afraid of it, or you don't like blowing off your sidewalk every day. Those are things that do not get you approved. And the longer I've worked for the city, the less of those requests I get because the tree companies have learned over time that my decisions are consistent. So a permit requesting to remove a pine tree because of pine cones on the ground is not going to get passed. All right, so the process to applying for a tree permit, you're going to have 3 outcomes. One is denied, and it's rare. This picture is actually of a tree that I denied, and it later ended up getting overturned by an appeals tree board we have. And they requested to remove this tree. It was about a 50-year-old silver maple that was in good health because the shed behind it had some lifting of the concrete base. My solution was they can spend $1,000 fixing the concrete instead of $5,000 removing the tree. But as I said, that ended up getting appealed and they went with the homeowner's request. You can get approved or you can get approved with planting requirements. So the city has both mitigation and minimum density. So the more trees you have on the lot, the less likely you'll have to plant something. But we do, our average lot size is 5,000 square feet, so 50 wide by 100 deep. and you are required to have a minimum of 3 trees on that lot with 1 in the front yard. There's a couple other sub-requirements for species as well. So one of the big things we deal with is development, and not large scale development like you might see in cities, but lot by lot development. We have a lot of old beach homes that don't even have central air, and they are being torn down and rebuilt with fancy new homes. If you're building a new house, 9 times out of 10, you're going to remove trees. So we require a pre-construction, a survey to show all the existing trees on the lot, and that has to be done by a professional surveyor. You can't draw them in by hand. We also require your proposed house plan to be laid down on that existing conditions survey, and that allows me to review those plans to see what trees can and can't be removed for the construction. And occasionally the city does request changes. So if you are building a new house and you want your front walkway to go through the middle of a 30-inch healthy oak, we're gonna nicely request that you reroute that. And by request, we mean require. But I always phrase it as a request. It comes across nicer. During construction, any tree that wasn't approved to be removed has to be retained, and it has to have that orange fencing around it. And because our lots are so small, the roots do end up getting compacted, driven over. There's just no way to avoid it. Probably the best thing we have is that upon closeout of that new house, I go out to the final inspection with the building inspector. So they check out the house, make sure it's complete and safe. And then I check out the landscaping. So those trees that were supposed to remain alive and in the ground, and any new trees that were supposed to be planted, have to be there to get a certificate of occupancy. So not just does the house have to be fit for occupancy, but the tree code has to be met. And until it is, you do not get your CO. And that is the city holding the cards, because the builder is going to want their final payment and the homeowner wants to move in. So if they're missing a tree, that doesn't happen. So they pretty much always comply with that. It is not an issue. This is something that we hear occasionally when we go back to review our code. Does it work? And that could be like an hour-long webinar unto itself. I go back and I look at the section of code I showed you guys in the beginning, the protect, manage, maintain, preserve. And I think overall the code does a pretty good job at that. And there is no doubt in my mind that we are saving more trees than if we didn't have a code. Replacement rates. So any work the city does, for every tree we remove, we plant about 3 new ones. Now on private property, this is just as measured by the permit. So what somebody does in their own yard planting without, a city requirement, we don't know, but they plant about 1 new tree for every 2 removed. So about 50% replacement ratio there. And we get into this debate, can a 30-inch, 70-foot tall oak really be replaced by 3 new little saplings? It's, like I said, that is a very difficult conversation, very involved. I like to look at our tree canopy map, and hint, hint, this one's old. It's from, I think they did them in 2017 or 18, and the data was a few years before that. And you can see that Rehoboth is at about 50%, which to me is high. The only area that's really not well treed is our business district, and we do have street trees. It's just they'll never outshadow the 50-foot tall buildings there. And when they get redone, we may be under 50%. It'll be a good baseline to measure. I mean, maybe 50% is the max of what we should be. But it's interesting food for thought with that one. But like any code, it's not perfect. It does work. And during development, which is the majority of the city's tree loss, the new homes, there will always be a certain amount of tree loss. There's just no way to take a 1,000-square-foot house and replace it with a 3,000-square-foot house and not have trees removed. It's unavoidable. So the other thing I brought up in the beginning is how it all got passed was public support. And there is still public support. But this is what we hear. Yes, but I love trees, but the code is too restrictive. It's not restrictive enough, or it's just too confusing and complicated. And honestly, like at one time or another since I've worked here, I've agreed with all three of these viewpoints. Especially with the complicated one, there's no way to make code uncomplicated. At the end of the day, it's still legalese, and that's why we have lawyers that read through and interpret it. But it should be consistent and not contradictory, which is sometimes what happens with municipal codes. So our last code update was basically never. We tried in 2014, right before I started with the city. It went to the commissioners. They had a draft from a planning commission, and they just couldn't agree on some of the big concept changes to the code that were recommended. So it died. So then fast forward a few more years to 2018, they wanted to try again. And we formed a committee. The committee reviewed the code. They, talked to citizens. They talked to tree contractors, builders, everybody. Well, it took them, 2.5 years to create this draft and present it to the commissioners. And that is where we're at right now. We have a draft. It's before the commissioners. COVID was kind of the number one thing they were dealing with. So I expect it to kind of get off the back burner, I think, in the next few months, but we'll see. And I think one of the reasons it's not changed is that it is very difficult to change codes going to commissioners. It requires several different public meetings, public input. Whether it's a small change or a large change, the process is the same. And so those codes end up feeling kind of static, because what was correct in best technology in 2006 has probably changed like 5 times in the last 15 years. And we have not updated the code at all to keep up with that, which is unfortunate. So some of the lessons learned with the tree code: if you're going to do a major update to the code, not just changing a couple of definitions or punctuation or fixing a couple of things that conflict, you need a knowledgeable consultant to keep things on track and keep the committee or whoever moving along. I never thought it was fair to rely on just citizens alone. It's a big responsibility and a big burden to place on people to have to review a 20 to 30 page tree code. And in retrospect, I look back at it before I even worked for the city and think, when they put in that second article, the private property regulations, the new code, it would have been better if they had made a simpler Article 2. Our second article is so involved. There's several different requirements, sub-requirements, processes, concepts. If they had just picked like 2 or 3 and kept it at 10 pages instead of 30, I think we probably would have updated it a couple of times since then. We could have added to it. We could have changed things. It's a lot easier to edit a 10-page code and add on another page or two than it is to edit a 30-page code. And then not just edit it, but then get it passed. So another thing is consistency. I alluded to it before, but the more consistent you are in your interpretation and enforcement, the less off the wall requests you get. To me, it's great when I hear from a homeowner that their tree company said, oh, this tree probably won't get approved by the city. That means the decisions I'm making have been so consistent that our contractors know what trees are going to qualify and what won't. And that helps them with their clients too. They're able to sell better tree work and have better clients that way because they're knowledgeable and have a good relationship. Also, citizen support. We never would have had the first or second article if the public hadn't been in favor of protecting the natural environment. It is something that's always been important to Rehoboth. It starts right at the beach, that our town and all the restaurants and my job wouldn't exist if we didn't have a beautiful, pristine beach and all the forests and parks that go along with it. And then, no matter how good a code you have, and I'd say ours is above average, it is not a substitute for an education program or for citizen advisory groups or friends of parks groups or for positive incentives. So tree pruning or tree planting grants, Arbor Day celebrations. You can't just have the enforcement and the regulation and not have any of the good fun stuff. And that is it. So if anybody has any questions, you can always send me an email or give me a call. I'm only down in Rehoboth, so I'm not that far away.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate that. We did have one question that came in the chat box for you.
Sure.
And it relates to what you were just talking about. So we'll go ahead and address it now. It says, what do you hope to change in the tree ordinance?
Well, there's a few technical issues. I was actually talking to Joe, your next presenter, and he said, I see you still measure the diameter of a tree. It's defined as a foot off the ground. So for the first like 6 months I worked for the city, I was out in the field measuring trees at DBH, which is for me like above my shoulders because I'm only 5'4". And then eventually a homeowner was like, oh, I thought in the code it said you measure them at a foot off the ground. So I go back and I reread it. And sure enough, I've been doing it wrong for 6 months. So, I mean, there are a lot of issues like that. But really, for me, it's the fact who has something that's 15 years old that hasn't been updated. The technologies we have for protecting trees now during construction. I mean, I don't think an airspeed was a common use 15 years ago. I mean, and now everybody has a local tree company that owns an airspeed, and that is much preferred over taking a backhoe and ripping out roots for excavation, which is what our builders love to do. So I would love to see some of those technologies incorporated into the code, as well as some positive incentives. So because our lots are so small, it can be very hard to work around existing mature trees. And it'd be nice if we can build in a couple of technical incentives for developers to maintain existing specimen trees. But more than anything, I'd love to see the commissioners really revive the talks, because I'm only one person. The tree code is really for the city as a whole, so it doesn't work if we don't have a variety of input. Thanks.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Right.
So Liz is going to stay with us. We'll be having a little bit more of a discussion at the end. And so now I'm going to be turning it over to Joe. And Joe, give me 1 second and I will share your document for you.
Thank you.
All right. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Spadafino from the city of Newark. Joe.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And my name is Joe Spadafino. I'm the Parks Recreation Director for the city of Newark, and I've been with the city for 25 years, and this is just about to complete my 6th year as director of the department. And before that, I worked with Kent County Parks and Recreation for 9 years. So been in the Parks and Recreation end for close to 35 years. But a little bit about Newark. It's we have 33,000 residents, and it's 9.4 square miles. And we do not have a resident tree ordinance for like they have in Rehoboth, and Liz just explained. Ours tree ordinance and tree preservation is for major subdivisions. And in Newark, if anybody's been through Newark, especially recently, whenever some properties close to, we're also in the University of Delaware, whenever there's properties that come for sale near the university or on Main Street, tear down the 2 or 3 houses. We have one plan in for tear down 3 houses and build a 4-story apartments with the first story as retail. But even with that, we have a lot of trees that old mature trees that need to be removed. So the tree preservation requirements were added to the ordinance in 2010. We had a new city manager come in, and he noticed that in the community he was in prior to coming to Newark, realized that Newark did not have any tree preservation and wanted to get that included into the ordinance. So that happened in 2010. And the old ordinance, and I refer to that as the old ordinance because we updated ours, which was approved in January of 2021. As Liz said, it was a 2-year process to get that established. And the old ordinance addressed removal of any tree 18-inch DBH or larger in any major subdivision. And then at that time, the tree preservation requirements required removal of value trees for 75% or greater of the value trees that were 18-inch DBH or greater must be preserved. But you could remove additional value trees, but there was a replacement required and plannings and required prior to the issuance of the certificate of occupancy. And at that time, the replacement value, if you want to scroll down, Jennifer, and I was unable to share my screen earlier today, so it's good we got on and practice early. So appreciate your help, Jennifer. At that time, the replacement value for every 6 inches of a diameter of a value tree, 18-inch or greater, was 2 1.5 inch to 2-inch caliper trees or 5 large shrubs, or any combination of the two as determined by the Parks and Recreation Director. So if you can scroll down, and I'd be remiss if I did. We have Tom Zaleski, who was our park superintendent, and he's been with the city for over 30 years, and he's also a certified arborist. So Tom and I, when we get projects come through, Tom and I consult for, depending on what project it is. I mean, we met today for probably close to 45 minutes to an hour on an upcoming subdivision that has to go before council. So we meet quite often between the code and Tom's expertise on tree specifications. You know, we actually think we make a pretty good team. So in September 2018, discussion began on updating the ordinance, and I'll give a little background on why that happened. And it did not address the following, and this was really highlighted. There was a subdivision of about 12 acres that was getting that was submitted to the city for annexation of 12 acres. That was in Newcastle County, but not in the city of Newark. And they were wanting to annex in 12 acres into the city, and pretty much 10 acres of it was wooded property. So that would have had the removal of probably, I believe it was 400 trees, and of those trees, 200 of them were value trees. And in the existing ordinance, it did not explain about what would happen if they could not get all of the trees in for off-site mitigation. It did not address that. So for the most part, up until that subdivision in 2018, there were a lot of one-offs where you couldn't get any more trees into the subdivision because of the homes and the roads and infrastructure that had to be in as part of the development. And sometimes we get 5 or 6, and we would plant those throughout our park system. And that system worked pretty good. But then we're finding more and more larger projects like this one. I believe there were 2 other ones after this. There were more value. There were so many trees that they could not get back in the subdivision. It was what we were going to do with those trees, and what would be the process for that to happen. So and the other item, we wanted more value on larger trees. So the 18-inch DBH trees were the same mitigation as a 40-inch DBH tree. The minimum of 2 1.5 inch to 2-inch caliper trees or 5 large shrubs. And the only option that they had was a tree or shrub mitigation, were the only options a developer would have, or we would have to give to the developer. And the preservation of existing trees, you could clear the entire forest, and there was nothing to prevent a developer from doing that. So the realization was that the code needed an update, and then it was, where do we begin? So I don't have as many pictures as Liz had. This is my only photo. We decided to get a task force, and we were, being in Newark and having the University of Delaware here, but also being a small state, we were able to get what I felt was a very good committee together. We got We want somebody that had some expertise in urban forestry, and Tara Trammell from the University of Delaware designated a lot of time into this. And then also, some of you may know Bill McElvoy, he's the state botanist. They helped lead the charge, as well as we had a representative for the Conservation Advisory Committee that Newark has, and then also somebody from our Planning Commission. And also we had one resident that was with us. So we started off with 5. We had a resident that was recommended by one of our council people, and we got through about a quarter of the meetings, and she had stepped away. It's a little bit overwhelming. We met once a month for up to probably about 2 years on the project. So so the first meeting was January 2019, and then it was finally approved by council in January 2021. We did hire a consultant, and as Liz said, that is very helpful. We help us try to cover all the bases. It's hard. Everybody had their certain areas of expertise, but we brought in a consultant who helped tie everything together a little bit, and also did a lot of research, and so did I and the committee on what some of the other tree ordinances around the country were. We looked at tree ordinances in Florida, the state of Washington, California, Oregon. We reviewed a lot of different tree ordinances. And I didn't have the consultant. When we were first trying to find our feet, we would spend 2 hours. That we'd have 5 items in the agenda. We'd get through 2 of them because we had a 2-hour maximum on the meetings, because everybody had other jobs that they needed to do, and we realized that. And then a lot of people, myself included, I'm a little ADD. So after 2 hours, it sort of gets hard to get everybody on the same page. So that worked out well for us, putting the time limit on. But the consultant, once we had a good direction of where I thought the committee and council want us to go, then we started getting the consultant in, because we hired them to attend 10 to 15 meetings, whatever. So I didn't want to burn up some of that time, the hourly rate, during some of that time we were trying to find our feet. And we also had the city solicitor review quarterly on some of the new items that we were looking at, including about any potential legal issues or challenges that we might not be able, that we might run into, and how could we, and if we thought that our code would stand up to any challenges or potential legal issue. And then we also kept the city manager updated. Our city manager, Tom Coleman, he's got an engineering background, as well as Tim Flasky, our public works supervisor. So sort of kept them involved as well, because they had worked for another engineering firm, and part of their job was making sure plans met code and so forth. And we've got some great engineering firms, some great developers, but every now and then, I think if anybody works in the, I know most of you work in the field of ordinances and different mitigation things, or whether it's code enforcement, what have you. It seems like sometimes they try to interpret it one way when it should be interpreted another, whether it's intentional or accidental. That's for another meeting. But so we sort of tried to find holes in it and adjust the wording so things would fall together a little more solidly. And if you want to scroll down, we went all the way down to the basics, measuring as Liz mentioned. We wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page for measuring DBH, because a number of times Tom and I would review a plan, and Tom would go out and measure the value trees, and we'd get different measurements. Either they were sending us in the caliper, or they were measuring the DBH too low, or whatever. So we just wanted to get everybody on the same page. So we spelled that out in our code as well. And then we also have we recommended the D-tape, and we also gave them the formula to determine the D-tape measures the DBH of a tree. And then we also gave the calculations to convert from caliper to DBH. Just want to scroll down. So some of the areas so with the updates, we addressed the tree preservation and on-site mitigation requirements. So wish I would have made that a little bit larger. So the original one, the code spoke to 18 inches or greater only. So we dropped that to between 12 inches and 23.99 inches or greater had to be we required that for the mapping requirements. And that brought our value tree count down from 18-inch. That addressed, so we've got a little bit more of the value trees included, the 12 inches, and then greater 12 inches, 17.99, and then 18 inches to 24. It all is different mitigation. So if you want to go to number 1 on this list, for every value tree with DBH of 12 to 17.9 inches removed, replacement is a minimum of 1.5 inch to 2 inch caliper tree. And when we first went, this process included at least probably 4 or 5 revisions, but we presented it to the Planning Commission, the Conservation Advisory Commission, and City Council. And we would take notes after each one of those meetings and make some adjustments. And what we heard was they wanted more. They wanted some sort of value for smaller trees, not just the 18 inches and up, and that's where that came from. And then also for number 2, for every 6 inches diameter value tree with 18 inches to 23.99 inches to be removed. At a minimum, 2 1.5 inch, 2 inch caliper trees or 5 large shrubs. And then for trees with greater DBH of 24 inches or greater to be removed, a minimum of 3 1.5 inch, 2 inch caliper trees or 8 large shrubs. So we increased that by an additional tree for every 6 inches, and then also for 3 more shrubs. And then we also have the developer must maximize replacement plantings to the satisfaction of the Parks and Recreation Director. So that you'll see consistently in here where everything's to my satisfaction. Might be too much, but it's really towards the city. And so what will happen is we'll get a submission, and Tom and I will sit down and we'll say, well, they can fit 3 more trees in this area, 2 more trees in that area. There's for whatever reason they may have not thought about putting in around some of the stormwater areas, whatever have you. But we want to make sure that is maximized into the subdivision where those trees were removed. And as we said, that's not always possible. So we want to scroll down. Thank you, Jennifer. So we established an off-site mitigation to give clearer guidance on what would happen if you cannot get all the trees for off-site or on-site. So we developed a tree replacement or a cash in lieu of trees, or a combination of the 2 categories. The cash in lieu replacement is a minimum of $500 per tree owed, whereas directed by the Parks and Recreation Director, or is based on and this number is based on the average cost of purchasing the tree, installation, and maintenance for a 2-year period. And then the cash in lieu money was deposited into a tree preservation, replacement, and management account. And we did not want a developer to save money by not putting tree in the subdivision. And well, it's the park's problem now to plant, and we're going to save money because it's costing us, $400 a tree to put in our subdivision. But now, the city for $200 is going to take this burden off of us. So that number, that is a minimum number. If the price should go up, and we talked to a number of landscapers throughout Newcastle County to get some idea of what that cost would be, including a 2-year warranty. And that was the number we felt was the good ballpark number for us to begin at. Again, it can be higher should that go up. That is a minimum. And the fees that are collected will go into a tree account, and that would go towards tree planting, reforestation, maintenance of the mitigation trees, and mitigation initiatives, or reforestation initiatives, integrated pest management, monitoring programs, and then also conservation easements or land acquisition. So should the account get large enough to do things like that. And then each year we want to give our council a report of where those mitigation funds are going. So we feel like we can get we always try to do reforestation projects. Keisha's with the Division of Forestry has helped us out, gave us a lot of guidance. But we're always looking for reforestation projects, and we thought this fund could help with reforestation. So we have a tree removal budget, and then also we have a tree maintenance budget and a tree account for blockages. So this fund would go for, we figure if we plant, because of this program, 2,000 additional trees or what have you, and a 10-year period, those trees are going to need, TLC. I'd like to say every tree in Newark lives forever, but we know with the emerald ash borer and the bacterial leaf scorch, and just from the trees getting old or for storms coming through, that those trees are going to need to be cared for. And if we had for off-site locations, and we would specify where in our park system on city property, we would specify the tree, the size, and the quantity of the plant material, and then we would lay out a plan of where we want those trees planted at. For example, if we were to have, well, we were looking at maybe having about 200 trees for off-site mitigation. For that, the city council did vote down that project, but Tom and I have discussed a plan to, instead of getting 200 trees in to one area in 1 year, we spread it out over a 2-year period, the plantings, and because our park needs change, the needs in our park system changed. I mean, over the last 2 years, we've developed 2 different parks. We felt some of those trees could go into those parks if we needed to, or like I said, we could do reforestation efforts in areas where we saw some holes in our forest. Let's scroll down again. And the big addition was the forested area preservation, and where you could go originally in the old ordinance was you could clear the entire forest. So the forest area preservation shall require the limit of removal forest areas of 50% or greater of the forest acreage of the site shall be preserved.